Hi, welcome to Person-Centered Recovery Planning, a review of plan components, Vignette 3, Jason. In this segment, we'll consider the experiences of Jason and consider what elements of his recovery plan might look like. For a quick review, you can simply watch and consider the content that we'll present. For a more in-depth opportunity, as like the other vignettes, you can practice your knowledge and skills by using the vignette and the prompts to imagine that you're working with Jason and create a full recovery plan, component by component, as you watch the video. You'll be invited to hit pause along the way and imagine that you're working with him and create each of the components that we're talking about. I'll let you know when it would be a good time to pause the video. If you choose not to do this, you'll still have opportunities to jot down notes and be invited to select the best plan component option from a multiple choice list on the screen, followed by an explanation of the best answer. Just as a reminder, we do offer a simple worksheet that's available for download if you choose to create the components for Jason. Otherwise, a blank sheet of paper is just fine. Here are the steps that we're going to take. The video is designed to demonstrate how sections of a plan document can reflect what we know and find meaningful about a person's identity and their plans for recovery. So we'll start by learning a little bit about Jason, including his vision of the life that he wants, his priorities for recovery, what's going well, and what he's encountering as barriers. After we've highlighted what we've learned about strengths and barriers, we'll consider what kind of goal statement we'd expect to find on his person-centered recovery plan, or PCRP. And that captures what is listed here as steps 1 and 2 and gives us an idea about where Jason is starting from. Next, we'll move on to thinking about how we expect his life to improve as those immediate barriers are no longer getting in his way. And we'll do this by identifying how one objective might read on his plan. And that's listed here as step 3 by anticipating the expected results. Then finally, in step 4, we'll think about different kinds of immediate actions Jason might take to produce those desired results, both within and outside of the professional mental health system. At the end, we will have put together a snapshot of the PCRP core components that show how different types of information fit together in a simple, practical way that both highlight the person's plan for a meaningful life and meet regulatory standards for things like medical necessity and billing. We won't end up with a complete sample recovery plan, but we will view a complete set of core components based on the story or the vignette that we begin with. So let's get started. Okay, here's what we know about Jason. Jason is a talented artist, producing as many as 30 realistic pencil drawings a week, with a few selling for $250 at a local art gallery. He has fond memories of playing basketball with his father in his youth, but is now disconnected from family and reports feeling lonely without any significant friendships or supports outside of paid providers. He enjoys nature and people watching around town, but never feels comfortable approaching anyone, stating he, quote, creeps people out due to slowed speech from medication side effects and occasional experiences of seeing people who others don't see, which can distract him during conversations, but can also be comforting when alone. He often dreams about what life could be like being in a community of local artists, maybe even teaching a drawing class to teens. He says, quote, I know I should appreciate my physical health and stability given the dark times I've had from the major depression and psychosis, but I feel like my life is missing something. He's had significant periods of being unhoused, but has maintained his own apartment that he likes for 2 years now. He's been connected to this outpatient program for 5 years. So take a minute to note Jason's strengths. What are the specific attributes, talents, skills, resources, anything that he can draw from immediately to aid him in his recovery process? Feel free to pause the video to absorb a little bit more of this information we have about him. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and highlight the elements of this story that really stand out as strengths. So he's got a lot to draw from. It looks like Jason has had a lot of accomplishments in his recovery already. So we see that he's a skilled artist. He's even receiving some income from that art. And this seems connected to his sense of identity as a person. I'm not really sure how the memories of him playing basketball with his father can be translated into his current life, but that is some information that we have, and I would certainly explore that with him. Is it still an interest, right? Does he like to play basketball? Does he like to watch basketball on TV? Does he hang out near, the local basketball court? We know that he enjoys nature and people watching. The fact that he sees people who others don't see are a source of comfort at times is interesting and something I might want to ask a little bit more about. We see here that he's physically healthy and he's maintained an apartment that he likes for 2 years, which is quite an accomplishment after being unhoused for significant periods. And then we also know that he's been connected to the outpatient program for 5 years. So that must be a source of support. So those are some of the things that stand out that we know Jason has to build on. So let's reset the vignette here and take a minute to be clear and highlight what are some of the immediate barriers or the focus of support right now. Feel free to pause the video and spend a little bit more time with the vignette to jot down those immediate barriers. Otherwise, we're going to highlight now what those are. So in general, Jason appears to be fairly far along in the process of figuring out how to manage the more challenging parts of his mental health condition. He's no longer faced with being unhoused or requiring hospitalization. It seems like the priority focus for him is feeling lonely. Seems like, maybe he's kind of stuck where he's achieved some stability, right? But now he kind of needs to take that extra leap into really achieving that quality of life. The fact that he doesn't have a support system beyond the paid network of supporters is something that really stands out to me, and that he wants to feel accepted as a member of his local community, particularly the artist community. He spends a lot of time out among people in his community, but is not connecting with them. We see that he's self-conscious about his speech, and that might be connected to the medication side effects. And that situation can obviously be pretty complicated because we don't want him to lose any of the gains that the medication may have helped him achieve. But medication can also get in the way of people's recovery because of side effects, and people, sometimes are over medicated, so that can be complicated. And then the visual hallucinations we see, although they aren't always bothersome, we see that they can at times get in the way of conversations with others. And again, while the major depressive episodes with psychosis and more severe life disruptions are in the past, it's something that's still on our radar because we want to help him maintain those gains. So based on that information, it feels like we have a pretty good sense of his strengths and barriers. So let's make sure before we move on to change and what we can do to support Jason, let's make sure we really know about his goal and imagine if we were working with Jason, what his goal statement might be on the plan. So let's take a minute and think about what Jason has stated to us that he's moving toward, what might give his life meaning and purpose, or serve as the motivation for the hard work of recovery. And as before, feel free to pause and give this a little bit more thought. Otherwise, we're going to look at some possibilities here on the next screen. So we've got some quality indicators listed there in the right column, and then we've got some possibilities to read and pick from. So which of these do we think are the strongest goal statement based on what we know about Jason? We have A, maintain stable housing. B, quote, I'd like to become part of the local artist community. C, reduce occurrences of visual hallucinations to less than once per week within the next 60 days. You can pause to take a little bit more time with this. Otherwise, let's review our options. So A is simply to maintain stable housing. Now, this might be an important thing to continue to measure as an outcome, especially if the particular program that Jason is in is focused on housing. And oftentimes programs want those program level outcomes. And so it might be something that we're keeping our eye on as an outcome, but it doesn't really meet the standards of how we think about goals in a person-centered model. B, I'd like to become part of the local artist community. This really seems like a strong, motivating recovery vision, given what we know about Jason. And so I think that is the strongest option. And C, this reads more like a measurable outcome that we might expect to see as an objective. Yes, it's more of a short-term gain to address an immediate barrier rather than being the why or the motivating vision of recovery. And of course, there are other goal statements that we might imagine Jason giving us as well. Like he mentioned teaching a class to teens, an art class to teens. So I could imagine a quote by Jason focused on that. So there's not one right answer here. So far on our little sample abbreviated person-centered recovery plan, or PCRP, we now have a sample goal statement, some strengths and barriers. So this really gives us a snapshot of where Jason is right now, what he wants, what's working for him, and what's getting in the way. So the next step is let's really take a close look at what his life might look like once those immediate barriers are no longer getting in his way. So we're going to develop one SMART objective as we think about those expected results. So feel free to pause and jot down some ideas on your own using the worksheet or a blank sheet of paper. Otherwise, we're going to move on to looking at some samples together and choosing the best one. Okay, let's take a look at these. We've got some quality indicators there as reminders on the right. A, Jason will have reduced occurrences of visual hallucinations to less than once a week within the next 60 days. Option B, Jason will maintain housing for the next 90 days. C, within the next 60 days, Jason will have increased comfort with social interactions, as evidenced by successfully speaking to 2 people in the community daily for an entire week per self-report. So you can consider further on your own by pausing the video. Otherwise, let's evaluate each of these options as objectives on the plan. So option A This is an outcome with a time frame. And we know that the visual hallucinations are an immediate barrier when he's in conversation with people. And this is relevant to the life that he wants because he's focused on loneliness, getting connected to his community. So, option A isn't terrible, right? It's relevant to what he's focused on, and it is something that we could measure. So, let's hold on to option A there as a possibility, right? Let's look at option B. Jason will maintain housing for the next 90 days. So, as I said previously, this could be a programmatic measurement that's being required. But given that he's had stable housing for some time now, I think it said 2 years, this would be a maintenance objective. It's measuring whether somebody has been able to maintain progress they already have. And so let's keep looking further to see if there's a stronger option to support Jason's recovery. Option C, let's see. This not only meets SMART criteria, but it imagines a life in the community where he's advanced his skills and comfort with social interactions. Perhaps he hasn't yet formed any relationships that he can call friendships just yet, but it does demonstrate an ability to routinely speak to people without feeling extreme discomfort, something that he can't do right now. So I think based on the three options, C is the strongest. It's the thing that's the short-term outcome that would build the most momentum toward the goal, toward his vision of recovery. So each of these aren't too far off the mark, but C, I believe, is the strongest. Okay, so now we've got each of the core components other than action steps. As you may remember, on a PCRP, action steps don't just include the professional services, they also include non-paid, non-professional action steps. So those would include personal action steps by the individual in recovery, and perhaps some additional action steps by natural supporters. So we already know that Jason doesn't yet have a network of natural supporters to rely on. That's something that, in fact, might be a major focus of treatment, right? Of our support for him. We want to support him in building that network of natural supporters and friends in the community. So that's an outcome that we're working toward with him. Now, if we looked a little bit closer, there may be some people in the community, right? There might be someone at the local coffee shop who he speaks to and is friendly. And we may not consider them to be a friend, but maybe we can still work with Jason to leverage that relationship. But in this case, based on what we know, we're going to identify one professional service and one personal action step that we might expect to see on Jason's plan. So if you'd like to develop that on your own for additional practice, this is a great time to hit the pause button and do that. Otherwise, we're going to look at some options. So which of these would we expect to see as an action step by Jason, what we might call a personal wellness strategy on the plan based on what we know about Jason? And remember, there's a strong correlation between personal action steps and people's strength. These are things that people can do right now. So option A, read about the benefits of social interaction on depression. B, take all medication as prescribed. C, sketch in the park at least 3 times per week, including areas where other artists hang out. Okay, let's review and pick the best option. C is definitely the strongest option based on what we know of Jason's interests and skills and what he's aiming to accomplish. But let's look at why we've thrown out A and B. So A may be something that we're going to get him to do, but he already seems pretty motivated to want more social interaction. And although he's got the diagnosis, the history of depressive episodes, we don't know that he's experiencing depression right now. So that kind of seems like a throwaway assignment, right? B, take all medications as prescribed. This is an example of a personal action step that simply mirrors the professional services, and it really undermines the purpose of personal action steps. So we never want to see that. But option C, it really amplifies the importance of actions that Jason may already be taking or taking sometimes and could be taking with more intention or more frequency. Okay, let's look at professional services. Option A, Mary Henson, peer specialist, will offer individual support weekly for the next 90 days to increase confidence with using wellness tools in the community. B, Isabella Bianchi, nurse practitioner, will offer medication management 2 times a month to address side effects. Option C, Elijah Davis, LMSW, will provide skills training weekly for 90 days for assertiveness skills, strategies to manage distractions during conversations, and stress management. So feel free to take a little bit more time with this. But all three of these are professional services that I think we would expect to see on Jason's PCRP. They all include the who, what, when, and why. In other words, they're all pretty individualized to Jason's needs. And we could imagine how each of them will help him progress toward that objective and ultimately toward the vision of the life that he wants. Okay, so this brings us to the end of creating a simple, abbreviated, person-centered recovery plan based on the information we had about Jason's life. Hopefully, for our learning purposes here, you can see how these core elements are linked together and achieve a balance of amplifying the person's identity as well as the role and expectation of the programs and professional services. Of course, any plan document at an agency will have additional sections like a narrative section, crisis plan, perhaps diagnoses, demographics, but these are the core components that are really meant to reflect our understanding of where somebody is now, the focus of services and supports, and the outcomes that we expect to see. This completes our example of Jason. Thank you for watching.